In many respects, God of War 2 is the most important game in the franchise's larger story. It serves as a culmination of so many past storylines, a beginning of so many new ones, and the introduction of so much important backstory. From first talking about crucial backstory elements and lore, to switching gears and changing directions to move firmly towards the series' endgame, God of War 2 did so much for the entire franchise's narrative. The game begins not long after Ghost of Sparta. Kratos sits firmly upon the throne of the God of War, and having grown increasingly more resentful and disillusioned with the gods of Olympus and their treatment of him, he's declared war on them. His vicious and brutal Spartan army have been leading a conquest as per his commands all over Greece, and cities have fallen to the might of the new God of War like dominoes. The latest city to come under attack from the Spartans is the city of Rhodes, and it is here where things finally come to a head. At the beginning of God of War 2, Kratos receives word from a general of his army. You may recognize him as the last Spartan, the devout soldier who offered him the arms of Sparta in Ghost of Sparta. That Rhodes too is about to fall, and that the city is ripe for the taking. All it needs is a final strike from Kratos, the God of War himself. But before Kratos can leave his throne on Olympus, Athena arrives, telling him to stop his conquest of Greece at once. She tells him that his warmongering has put his fellow gods on edge, and that if he continues down the warpath, she won't be able to protect him from their wrath. Kratos, of course, tells her that he needs no protection. She reminds Kratos that it was she who made him a god, but after angrily telling her that he owes her nothing, he turns away and leaves. He lands in Rhodes and leads his Spartan army's final charge in his capacity as the God of War. Just like Ares had done in his attack on Athena back during the first God of War, Kratos grows to the size of a mountain and wreaks absolute havoc. Soon though, it becomes clear to him that Olympus is not going to stand idly by while he blazes a trail of destruction across Greece. An eagle soars through the sky and zaps him with electricity, and as it does, it robs him of most of his godly powers. Kratos shrinks in size, and believing the eagle to be Athena, he screams in frustration, telling her that she will pay for what she's done. As he shrinks down to the size of a human once again, the eagle lands on top of the gargantuan statue known as the Colossus of Rhodes, transferring all of Kratos' powers into it, bringing it to life with the intention of killing Kratos. But while Kratos may now be human-sized and up against a skyscraper-sized statue imbued with godly powers, he's come across worse odds in the past. In a thrilling, epic, multi-staged boss battle that rages across the city of Rhodes, even as the siege carries on in the background, Kratos manages to beat the Colossus of Rhodes. How? Well, with a little help from none other than Zeus, the king of Olympus. As Kratos gears up to defeat the Colossus, he is contacted by Zeus, who tells him how he can defeat it. He tells him that it can be done with the help of a godly weapon known as the Blade of Olympus. During the Great War, it was with the help of the Blade of Olympus, a weapon that can even kill gods and titans, that Zeus and the Olympians were able to defeat the Titans. As he tells this to Kratos, he sends the Blade of Olympus plummeting down from the sky to Rhodes and tells Kratos to imbue the weapon with his remaining powers to be able to use it to defeat the Colossus of Rhodes. And that is exactly what he does. He transfers his remaining abilities and powers into the Blade of Olympus, goes into the Colossus, and then destroys its mechanical heart with the Blade of Olympus. But afterwards, as he revels in his victory and proclaims to the gods of Olympus that it's going to take a lot more to bring him down, his hubris once again proves to be his undoing. As the Colossus of Rhodes collapses in the background, Kratos is crushed under the weight of its hand in the middle of his rant, sending the Blade of Olympus flying a short distance away. Weakened and on the brink of death, Kratos realizes that all of his godly powers are stored within the sword, and to survive, he must get to it. Before he can do it though, God of War 2 hits the player with its first major shocking reveal. As Kratos crawls towards the Blade of Olympus with his loyal Spartan soldiers looking onward, the eagle that stole Kratos' powers lands next to it, and it is revealed that the eagle was actually Zeus, not Athena. It was Zeus who stole Kratos' powers, and it turns out he only helped Kratos defeat the Colossus so that he'd be able to fool him into transferring all of his godly powers into the weapon, thus making it easier for him to be killed. Kratos' bloodlust and his wanton conquest of Greece were bound to provoke a reaction from Olympus sooner or later, and as it turns out, that is exactly what this is. But, of course, that's not the only reason Zeus wants Kratos dead. We'll get back to that in a while. As Kratos processes the revelation that it was Zeus, not Athena, who betrayed him, the king of Olympus retrieves the Blade of Olympus, walks over to Kratos, who's lying on the ground in shock and pain. The Olympian chastises the Spartan for his sacrilege, and then he drives the Blade of Olympus through his stomach, killing him. But as Kratos is being pulled into the depths of the underworld, he is contacted by someone he didn't expect to hear from. He's contacted by Gaia, the mother of all Titans. It is at this point in God of War 2 that players are introduced to many major pieces of backstory that go on to prove pivotal to the future narrative developments. Gaia tells Kratos about the Titanomachy, about Kronos and his fear of the prediction made by the Sisters of Fate, about how Zeus defeated the Titans with the help of his brothers and sisters and banished them to Tartarus, and how the Titans were overthrown and replaced by the gods as the rulers of Greece. The Titans, now living in permanent exile and marred by defeat and humiliation, want revenge on the gods of Olympus, and Gaia thinks Kratos is the man who can deliver that vengeance to them. She asks Kratos for his help, telling him that by helping them defeat the Olympians, he's basically helping himself too, because with the help of the Titans, he'll be able to defeat Zeus and have his own vengeance as well. And how will he do that precisely? By traveling to the island of creation, where the Sisters of Fate reside. But who and what exactly are the Sisters of Fate? They belong to a species of entities known as the Primordials, the very first beings that ever existed, even before the gods or Titans. We spoke about the Primordials at the very beginning of Part 1, in case you've forgotten. They are essentially in charge of time itself, weaving and unweaving fates of everyone and everything in the world, including gods and Titans as well. They answer to no one, but they take their jobs as keepers of time very seriously. Gaia tells Kratos that if he can convince the Sisters of Time to help him, he can then travel back in time to the moment when Zeus killed him, stop him from doing so, and turn the tables by killing the King of Gods himself right then and right there. Gaia grants Kratos the aid of the magical flying horse known as Pegasus, and atop his new steed, Kratos flies to the island of creation. On the way, he's forced to make a slight detour, which sees him meeting the Titan named Typhoon as well as Prometheus. But since those encounters aren't really all that important to the larger narrative, we won't be talking about them. Kratos makes it to the island of creation soon, and it is in this place that provides the bulk of the gameplay hours in God of War 2, just as Pandora's Temple did in its predecessor. On the island, in his attempt to make it to the Sisters of Fate, Kratos runs into a number of interesting figures. The first of those is Theseus, the fabled Greek warrior who, as per mythology, is the son of Poseidon and the first ever king of Athens. In God of War 2, Theseus is on the island, serving as the keeper of the keys that control the steeds of time, gigantic mechanical horses that can move entire islands. Incidentally, it was Kronos himself who had given the steeds to the sisters as gifts in order to win their favor and be able to change his fate, which was dictated that he would eventually be overthrown by his own son. Without going into too much detail, Kratos needs the keys to be able to use the steeds to move the island of creation in his quest to get to the sisters, but predictably enough, Theseus is unwilling to cooperate with him. The two warriors engage in battle, which ends as Kratos bests his foe, taking the keys from him and then using the steeds of time. He also runs into Perseus, another well-known hero of ancient Greek mythology. Perseus, it seems, wants to meet the Sisters of Fate just as Kratos does, but for very different reasons. He wants to convince them to turn back time to save the life of his loved one. But as it turns out, things haven't been going well for him on his quest to do so, and he's been trapped in a room for a very long time, which is at least partly responsible for having driven him half mad. When Perseus sees Kratos, he believes that his appearance is another test from the Sisters of Fate, and he foolishly challenges him to a battle. Predictably enough, Kratos beats and kills Perseus. But his most unexpected and interesting encounter on the island of creation, out of all of the others, is his encounter with Alaric. Remember him? Alaric was the king of the barbarian army that defeated Kratos' force of Spartans 10 years ago, on that fateful day when he pledged his soul to Ares. Alaric, it turns out, managed to escape the underworld after Kratos lopped his head off in that battle a decade ago, and like many others, he traveled to meet the Sisters of Fate in order to change his destiny. As the barbarian and Kratos stand face to face in front of each other again, the Spartan notices his old foe still has a faded scar on his throat at the very spot where Kratos cut his head off. The two engage in a furious, thrilling battle once again, and once more Kratos manages to kill the barbarian. Eventually, Kratos comes across Icarus, another figure from ancient Greek mythology you may be familiar with. The winged man known as Icarus, as it turns out, has basically lost his mind, and incidentally, Kratos finds himself in a need of a way to cross a large chasm to get to the next stage of his quest. Kratos strips Icarus's wings off of him and kills him, but the two of them plummet down a deep hole in the earth, right down to the pits of Tartarus. And there, Kratos once again runs into the Titan Atlas, who is still chained to the pits with the weight of the world literally upon his shoulders, just as Kratos left him during their fateful encounter 5 years ago at the end of Chains of Olympus. Atlas, it seems, is still holding a grudge over Kratos, seeing as he is in his current state of imprisonment because of the Spartan. But when Kratos tells him that he is being aided by Gaia and that he plans to turn back time and kill Zeus, something that is obviously in the interest of the Titans, Atlas decides to help the Spartan get back to the surface, while also telling him that Kratos will have to make use of the incredibly powerful Blade of Olympus if he is to truly kill Zeus. When Kratos gets back to the surface, he is attacked in the dark by an unknown figure, whose only physical appearance at the time seems to be a silhouette at the most. Kratos easily manages to best him in combat, and as he does, he's able to see just who his enemy really is. It turns out it is none other than one of his very own loyal and devout soldiers, the man we've come to know as the Last Spartan. The Spartan, it turns out, attacked Kratos unaware of who he was since he believes him to be dead. Before dying, he tells Kratos that after killing him, Zeus made it to Sparta and completely destroyed the city, and it was to change this event that the Last Spartan traveled to the island of creation. This angers Kratos even further, whose resolve to kill Zeus and exact his revenge strengthens even further. And after an epic fight against a kraken with the aid of a fiery phoenix, Kratos manages to finally reach the Palace of the Fates, the stronghold where the Sisters of Fate reside. Kratos walks in, and in the throne room, he meets Atropos and Lachesis, two of the Sisters of Fate, and states his desire to kill Zeus and change his own fate. The sisters, though, refuse this request, and as you can imagine, that doesn't sit too well with Kratos. Realizing that the sisters are not going to let him change the course of time the way he intends to, and that the only option left to him is to confront the third sister of fate, Kratos takes on both the sisters in battle. The combined encounter against the sisters is an absolute blast, thrilling in design, spectacularly cinematic, and brimming with excellent narrative drama. In the middle of their battle, the sisters drag Kratos through a mirror and into the past, and he finds himself on top of the surface of the Blade of the Gods in Athens, the very sword he had used to defeat Ares, while the past version of himself and Ares clash in the final encounter of God of War in the background. The sisters intend to destroy the weapon and change the past, making it so that when Ares ripped the Blades of Chaos from Kratos' arms, he would have no other weapons to use in the ensuing fight, which would lead to Kratos' death. The Spartan, however, manages to defend the blade, stopping the two sisters from destroying them, and somehow manages to travel back through the mirror and into the present, in the Palace of the Fates. Before the sisters can follow him back, Kratos destroys the mirror, their portal back into the present, essentially erasing the two sisters' very existence. With two of the three Sisters of Fate dead, Kratos presses onward, overcoming more trials and obstacles along the way, until he encounters the huge, hideously deformed Clotho, the third Sister of Fate. She incidentally also happens to be the one who operates the Loom of Fate, the mechanism that the sisters have always used to control and manipulate time in all of its ebbs and flows. Kratos' encounter against Clotho is particularly interesting, serving as a massive puzzle, a platforming section, and a boss fight all wrapped together in one package. Eventually, Kratos uses her own traps to kill her, which leaves the Loom of Fate open to be used by him as he pleases. But Kratos doesn't want or need to revel in small victories. He has his eyes on the big goal. He spins the Loom of Fate and uses it to travel back to the exact point of time when Zeus used the Blade of Olympus to kill Kratos in Rhodes. Kratos rams into Zeus, sending him hurtling to the ground, and pulls the Blade of Olympus out of his own past dying self, as the King of Olympus looks on in confusion and terror. A quick side note before we continue with the story, God of War 2's story functions perfectly for what it is, the video game equivalent of a summer blockbuster. It has great drama, spectacular set pieces, solid pacing, and some well-executed revelations to keep the player interested. But unfortunately enough, it completely falls apart under scrutiny. Just like most other stories that involve time travel, Kratos' actions at this juncture make no sense whatsoever. Logically, this should have created a massive time paradox, because if Kratos did indeed stop Zeus from killing him, he never really died, which means he'd never traveled to the Island of Creation, never used the Loom of Fate, which means that he couldn't have saved himself from being killed, which means he did die, you get the point. It's a vicious circle and one that makes no sense, so really it's best if you just don't think about it too deeply, just go with it. Sounds good? Anyways, back to the story. With the Blade of Olympus in hand and the king of the gods standing before him, Kratos understands that now is the time to exact revenge on Zeus. The king of Olympus and the ghost of Sparta engage in a thrilling multi-staged battle, clashing against each other with all of their respective powers until finally, Kratos uses a bit of trickery and theatricality to trick Zeus into believing he has the upper hand. Kratos grabs this moment of opportunity and drives the blades of Athena, God of War II's equivalent of the blades of Chaos, through Zeus's arms, pinning him to the rock behind him. He then takes the Blade of Olympus and drives it through the Olympian. But Zeus is the king of Olympus, the god of gods, and he's not going to die so easily. Before Kratos can finish him off, Athena appears on the scene, intervening and stopping the Spartan from finishing what he started. The two become locked in a clash of their swords, and seeing this is the perfect opportunity to run with his life, Zeus gets up while Kratos is still distracted and makes his escape. Kratos attempts to stop him, pulling away from Athena and charging at the escaping Zeus with the Blade of Olympus, but at the very last moment, Athena jumps in front of her father, impaling herself on the blade and allowing Zeus the opportunity to escape. Kratos lets out an anguished gasp, demanding to know why Athena chose to sacrifice herself to save the life of Zeus, while Zeus himself looks back at the two of them one last time. He tells Kratos that he had started a war that he cannot possibly win, and with this he escapes, fleeing to Mount Olympus. It is at this point that Athena tells Kratos why she didn't want him to kill Zeus, and with her revelation, a lot of things in the franchise's larger story suddenly fall into place. It turns out that Kratos is actually Zeus's own son, and thus, he's the half-brother of Athena, as well as the now-dead former god of war Ares, his old master. Zeus, it is revealed, killed Kratos not only because his repeated attacks on other cities and his attempted conquest over all of Greece, but also because he wanted to put an end to the Sister of Fate's predicted cycle of sons killing their fathers. Just as Uranus was overthrown by his son Kronos, who was then ousted by his own son Zeus, Zeus had been living in fear that one of his own sons would topple him and replace him as the ruler of Greece as well. By killing Kratos, he was making sure that the cycle would be brought to an end. Kratos is obviously shocked, but he recovers pretty quickly, declaring that he has no father and that he will still kill Zeus to have his vengeance like he planned. Athena tells him that Zeus is the king of Olympians, that he's at the heart of the pantheon of gods, and that if he were to die, not only would it be catastrophic for the Olympians, but for the entire world itself. As such, if Kratos were to carry on his quest for revenge, the other gods of Olympus would do everything in their power to stop him. But such obstacles cannot deter a man such as the ghost of Sparta. He declares that if all on Olympus shall deny him his vengeance, then all of them shall die at his blade. Athena dies in Kratos' arms, succumbing to the wound dealt to her by the Blade of Olympus, as Kratos pledges to destroy the gods of Olympus by any means possible. He then goes back to the Palace of the Fates and uses the Loom of Fates as the structure crumbles around him to turn back the Wheel of Time once again. This time he travels back a long time to the time of the Great War between the Titans and the Olympians. This should once again lead to a causality paradox, but let's ignore that and get on with the story as we decided we would earlier. Kratos sees Gaia, and he tells her that rather than being destined to lose the war now, she and her fellow Titans could travel back with Kratos to his time and win the war there by helping him defeat Zeus and his followers. Back at Olympus, Zeus holds an emergency gathering with his fellow gods, with the likes of Hades, Poseidon, Helios, and Hermes all in attendance. Zeus tells them about what transpired with Kratos, and declares that the gods of Olympus shall put aside any petty differences they have to pool their powers together and kill Kratos to finally put an end to his bloody ways. As he makes his rousing speech though, the ground shakes violently and a ruckus of noises break out outside. He runs to the outside alongside his fellow gods to investigate. In the final scene of God of War II, the camera pans out with Zeus and the other gods standing on top of Mount Olympus, with an army of titans scaling the mountainside. Kratos stands atop Gaia, who leads the attack, with the Blade of Olympus in his hand, and he mockingly calls out to Zeus as his father, even as the mother of all titans makes the climb. The ghost of Sparta proclaims that Zeus's son has returned, and that with him, he brings the destruction of Olympus. And that's where we're going to end part 5. When we come back for the 6th and final part of this series, we will take a look at the events portrayed in the last game of the series chronology so far, God of War 3, which picks up at the exact moment God of War 2 ends. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.